Hey everybody, good morning. Morning, welcome. First of all, welcome to Christ Church Santa Fe. We're so glad to have you with us this morning. This morning kicks off what I hope will become our annual fall school of theology. Every year, God willing, around this time in September, connected with our regional presbytery meeting, we're hoping to bring someone in to speak to us in a gospel-centered and biblical way about a topic, sometimes maybe a challenging topic. So this morning we have with us my friend and counselor and a mentor and just an amazing guy, Mr. Jim Pachta, right here, who will be sharing with us, and his wife Linda is also with us. Linda, could you just raise your hand real quick? Okay. I told Jim he and I were going to have to do like a little TikTok dance to get started, but we shut that down because we didn't want you guys to run out the door. So as you know, Jim will be sharing with us this morning on a gospel-centered biblical approach to gender and sexuality. He's going to do a bit of a longer intro, but I wanted to read just a few words from his bio on his gospel, one of his Gospel Coalition articles. Jim is a psychotherapist and biblical counselor based out of the holy city of Dallas, Texas. He is a follower of Jesus, husband to Linda, and father to 3 wonderful sons, father-in-law to 3 incredible daughters, grandfather to not 3 but 5 amazing grandchildren. So we just had 2 more. And he's also a ruling elder, which in our world just means one of the pastors at St. Peter's Presbyterian Church in Dallas. So can we just, round of applause, welcome Jim this morning. Awesome. And the plan for the morning is basically 2 talks and Q&A. After the first talk, we will have a brief intermission. Then Jim will talk again. So gender and sexuality ruined, gender and sexuality redeemed, and then probably a pretty lengthy time of Q&A. If we get all the way up to 11:30, great, and we'll see how we do. So, Jim, thank you so much for being here. We love you, bless you, and come and share.
Well, good morning. What an honor, truly an honor to be here this morning. Greg, I love you. I love you and your family. I love what you're doing here at Christ Church Santa Fe. I love being able to come before people and share the redemption of God, His story in my life and the story of my wife. It's risky, it's hard, it's a hard story as you'll hear, but it's worth it because He is worth it. He is worthy of all the praise, the honor, and the glory, and that's why we do what we do. So let's get started. According to a recent poll, 86% of those who identify as LGBTQ were involved in the church at some point during their adolescence or childhood. We in the church have much to answer for. As someone who was living as both gay and transgender, I knew more about what the church thought of me as I read their placards and their pickets on my way to the bars than I did through long and inviting conversation. So as I share the following biblical, statistical, and theological information, please keep in mind we are dealing with real people at the end of the day. It's not about being right or powerful or political. It's about being loving when we share the truth. We're dealing with hurting, wounded people with a history of them justifiably not trusting the church. There is deep need in the LGBTQ community that we can meet, but we need to be humble before we can be helpful. That's the message of Matthew 7, when we're told to remove our log before helping others with their speck. When we judge, we are to do so to our own body first, so we can clearly see to be of service. Let me pray for us. Father, what a privilege we have to inquire of you and ask for illumination by your Spirit. Help us now develop a greater understanding of your gospel as it relates to our sexuality. Lead us to the holy ground of gender, as that's where we get to reflect you to the world around us through Jesus. Amen. Before I begin speaking about gay and transgender issues, I need to speak about gender issues in general. And before talking about gender, I need to talk about where we get it. Much of what I'm going to say later is based on the foundation of what I'm going to say now. Also, I want you to ponder a couple of questions as I continue. Men, when are you the most male? When do you experience yourself as the most masculine? Women, when are you the most female? When do you experience yourselves as the most feminine? And all y'all, brought a little Texan with me. All y'all, when are you the most spiritual? Think about that, and we'll get to those questions later. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, Paul tells Timothy that we've received a spirit, not of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. That word power is the word dunamis. I'm going to camp out on that word for a bit, and we're going to make some use of it before going on to understand gender and sexuality. Dunamis is where we get our word dynamic. Our dynamic is the way we come across, how we are experienced and engage one another. We are not created as a bunch of static, separated individuals, but as interconnected and involved community. We have a vibe, a way of relating that other people get, feel. Paul tells Timothy he has a gospel-infused power, a way that is to be given to others in love, which will culminate in him having a sound mind. So rather than living in fear, avoiding this connection, we love. Perfect love, we are told, casts out all fear. And we have this way about us because we are the Imago Dei, the image of God, who also comes across in a certain way and is experienced. God is not some being out there who wound us up to watch us go about our daily business. Romans 1:16 says that the gospel, the good news, is the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes. It is good news to the believer that the way God comes across, his power, his dynamic, is salvific. God comes across as saving and pursuing to believers. The rest of the chapter shows how he comes across in wrath who those who won't believe, who won't worship him, who exchange his glory, his truth, his person. So God has dunamis, a dynamic. And we as the Imago Dei, we do too. Okay? With me so far? Good. Now understand that the deepest part of who we are is our gender. We are made to come across as gendered to the glory of God. Our Westminster Standard Confession starts with, "The chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever." God didn't make us human and then give us gendered characteristics. No, He gave us genders first with human characteristics, attributes. Genesis 1:27 says, "Male and female He created them in His image." That means we were to be experienced by others as we mirror, magnify, and mimic the Lord as gendered beings. But we didn't. We sinned. We fell short of that glory, of that image. And that sin has caused us to all live in a manner as to deny the depth of our gender by running, hiding, blaming, and covering. Because of that sin and its shame, we come across in ways that are less than our design and definition. Our dynamic is indicative of a relationship offered which reveals our story, redeemed or not. Our dynamic is indicative of a relationship offered that reveals a story, redeemed or not. In other words, we come across in ways to others, and that indicates what kind of a relationship we're offering, right? Whether shallow or deep, aloof or cold, close or intimate. And if a person is unaware of the redemption of their story, they are unaware of their purpose by God's design, or if they're not a part of God's redeemed people, there will not be a rich or robust relationship offered. That relationship cannot culminate in a dynamic full of the fruit of the Spirit of love, joy, peace, patience, etc. If we are not fully embracing our God-designed gender, we will not come across in ways that fail to mirror our Creator. We will be experienced as men and women who have less to offer as gendered beings, robotic, static, cardboard, or shallow. And every one of us starts there. Every single one. Not just gay, lesbian, transgender folk. All of us. Our dynamic is only gloriously reflective when our story is magnificently redeemed. Only when God gets a hold of our stories will there be no regret in our narrative, and we will live out that narrative with gifts to give. That's how redemption works. Now, there's a spectrum of ways in which we have fallen short. We all diminish our genders and sexualities by becoming incompetent little boys and girls, people-pleasing nice guys and gals, entertaining happy-go-lucky party people, or tyrannical men and women. We all fall short. We do not display His character and nature in those categories. Sin misses the mark. When growing up, this sin intersects with the spectrum of woundedness and gives color to the trajectory of our lives. sin will take advantage of where we feel pain in our childhood and demand safety and control and comfort. The direction we then choose to take will be colored by the wound-informed sinfulness, creating a self-protective, self-exaltive lack of movement toward others. In other words, a failure to love well. Our true God-designed genders are therefore sullied and beneath the surface. We are truly glorious ruins. We're playing it safe and in control. This affects our desires and our dreams. We are committed to self-protection rather than faithful movement in God's design. And this goes for all of us. Gays and lesbians are under this as well as the rest. Same-sex attraction, SSA, is therefore a choice that doesn't feel like a choice. If a young male, due to shame, sees himself as less than male, or he doesn't believe he has what it takes to move into his world with what he needs, then the dominoes start to fall concerning his sexuality. It's never just one cause. If a woman feels shame in her femaleness or fear to be vulnerably feminine, she's going to put up walls and guard her heart from what she perceives to be risky relationship. And we're all running scared. Not only are we created with genders, but we are designed with longings. We all want life to work, we want to be loved, and we want God to show up. Those are the three categories of longings with which we are created. First, we want life to be a garden without thorns and thistles. We want ease and contentment, but our lives are hard. We also want love and respect, affirmation, relationship, and impact. But relationships are messy and painful. We yearn for God to reveal Himself and be there intimately for us. But sin has separated us, and we experience that distance, and we run, and we hide, and we blame, and we cover up. We deeply crave this life, but none of those three longings will be met completely. Not in this life. So we manufacture ways to deny, diminish, or demand relief from the pain of those unmet longings. We are hungry, and we either eat loads of junk food, idolatry, immorality, disordered individualism, or we starve ourselves into feeling no hunger at all, repression, suppression, rather than take our deep hunger before the Lord and wait upon Him. As a deer pants for water, so my soul pants for Thee, O God. Panting is painful, but faith comes from that. Jesus wants to show up for us in that context. Our longings stem from our genders. And sin-formed self-protection means none of us is getting or giving according to our design without a spirit empowerment, grace-drenched power from God. We need to remember that foundationally as I proceed. In Matthew 9, we read, "When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd." And that's how we should frame our conversation with the LGBTQ community. That's how we should view our understanding of gay, lesbian, and transgender folk, with compassion. I came to faith in the Midwest in 1975 amidst the upheaval of the sexual revolution of the 60s and the beginning of the swell of the gay rights movement. The Stonewall riots had in New York City, when gay and transgender folk stood their ground against the brutality of the police, occurred just 6 years before, in '69, and life was now changing rapidly. Little by little, the gay rights movement was getting a foothold in the general population, and normalization wouldn't be far behind. I was gay and transgender, desperate to get my sex change operation, following in the footsteps of my hero, Dr. Renee Richards, the former tennis pro who fought to play pro tennis as a transsexual woman. It was possible, I'd heard, to go to Switzerland and get it done, so that's where I set my hope. But I was miserable during those days, as God was just beginning to get my attention. My depression had reached suicidal levels. I had years before been kicked out of my house. I had been fired from 3 jobs. I was failing out of my senior year of high school. So when I heard the gospel that cold, snowy January night in 1975, I felt like I had no choice but to believe. You see, I was grasping at any hope. But in believing the truth, I was also believing things that were not true. I thought these feelings would be removed from me. And they were not. In fact, they became more resolute, which was confusing. I was told I was in danger of losing my salvation. I was told I hadn't believed hard enough. I was told Christians don't feel this way. So I gave up on my newfound faith and moved on. Easy come, easy go. I had been abandoned by my Heavenly Father like so many fathers before him. So what was new? I pursued life as a gay man with abandon after that. Nothing to lose, no hope. I left Littletown, Ohio immediately upon graduation and moved to Southern California, where the gay party scene was now in full swing. And I felt like I'd come home at last. I could go out in full drag and not feel judged. I could get all the affirmation I needed. I eventually met another young man, and we moved in together, and life was complete. Until it wasn't. God was apparently not done with me yet. When talking about experiencing same-sex attraction, being transgender, or having any other broken sexuality, it is vitally important to start at the core, to begin at the beginning, to get a grip on where we are now and how we got here, let alone where we're going. Having SSA or being transgender does not take place in a vacuum. Our anthropology must be informed by our theology. It needs to be located in the creation found in Genesis 1 and 2. Humanity without a God-designed gender and sexuality makes us mud with no movement. There is no purpose, no life. There are sharp and distinct contrasts between the genders in Genesis. When Romans 1, written in the context of creation, states there is a nature where God reveals himself, his divine attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, he declares that moving away from that has ramifications. Our sexuality actually speaks to that. And while those differences between the genders may be more descriptive than prescriptive, the beauty of difference shines through. All throughout history and in all cultures, this has been the case until the rationalist period. The modernist movement, beginning with Descartes in the early 1600s, the rationalist period, believed that we were the arbiters of our own lives. Up until this point, God or the gods, the supernatural, dictated being. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am, removed God from that equation. God had always been our determiner, but no longer. Then around the 1800s, the Romantics, rightly arguing against the rationalists, went even further from God toward, I feel, therefore I am. Emotions became the decider of identity. Homosexual wasn't even a word before 1860s. As an aside, the first known appearance of homosexual in print is found in an 1869 German pamphlet arguing against a Prussian anti-sodomy law. And in 1886, the psychiatrist Richard von Krafft-Ebing used the terms homosexual and heterosexual in his book Psychopathia Sexualis. The Romantics replaced the rationalists, and the Freudians took that and ran with it, saying, I desire, therefore I am. Now we have supposedly replaced modernism with postmodernism. We define ourselves not according to some created design, but we can change our definition daily with experience telling us who we are and how we should relate. We are so far from God's design and definition. There are scores of gender identities from which to choose. The alphabet soup of LGBTQIA+ is ever growing. And the church is just a few respectable steps behind, having a form of godliness, denying the power thereof. So we moved our sense of being from I am to I think, to I feel, to I desire, to I demand. For those who would suggest that this movement is victimless, to each his or her own, I would posit the following. Transgenderism is radical idealism, not just in understanding self-concept, but even in argumentation. Transgender argumentation does not refer to nature or bodies as we find them. It does not locate the importance of the body there. Rather, understanding is built on a priori structures or social interpretation which believe in a radical subjectivity of nature due to changing social definitions of what gender can mean. It disregards nature's existence or that it has meaning of its own. When a human's will is determinative over nature, then one is not taking nature or body seriously as a basis for epistemology or even ethics. Transgenderism, then, is an idealist, romanticist, nihilistic reaction to an overly materialistic age. Some in the movement are even turning to Native American and Hindu concepts of dual soulism to aid its reasoning. There's a desperate sense of leaving behind Judeo-Christian objectivity to solidify its reasoning and find relief. But the more it succeeds, the more its opponents are necessarily demonized. In a unanimous decision, an employment tribunal in London recently determined that transgender individual rights transcends those who believe in binary genders. They ruled that belief in Genesis 1:27, lack of belief in transgenderism, and conscientious objection to transgenderism in our judgment are incompatible with human dignity and conflict with the fundamental rights of others. We live in confusing times, a time of philosophical tectonic shift, theological upheaval. But the Great Commission still hasn't changed. We are called to love and live out the gospel to a hurting and confused world. So please hear me speaking truth in love. The LGBTQ community needs a response from us that is vastly different from what we have been accused. I was brought into the world in 1957 and was removed from the alcoholic and horribly abused woman who bore me. I was removed along with 2 brothers and a sister. My birth father ended up dying in prison from tuberculosis when I was 3. He was jailed for the sexual assault of my sister. I was adopted by a childless couple in a Cleveland suburb who had been informed they could never have children born to them. The next several years would bring in more adopted, foster, and by surprise, biological children, making it quite a large family. I ended up with 6 sisters and 3 brothers. Now, those are the facts. But deep inside this familial menagerie, there was something inside me that was way off. Though there were many of us, I never felt like I belonged. This family was steeped in chaos. There was no stability nor security. My father was always enraged, and you'd never see him without a beer in his hand. And my mother controlled coldly. I was anxious, afraid, and lost in the shuffle. Somewhere along the way, I, being sensitive and creative, began to relate more with these older sisters than my younger brothers. And I felt, from as far back as I can remember, like that girl in a boy's body. I recall as early as 4 or 5 years old wondering if God had not made a huge mistake. I would go to bed at night praying that I'd wake up the correct sex. The older I got, the more pronounced my effeminacy became. I found comfort in the fantasy of being the princess in flowing gowns that my sisters got to play. I knew I had to be careful, though, as I was also deeply aware that some things were not all right to discuss in my home. My father was a gruff, hard ex-army man, big and brusque. He was tough and had little time for this artistic, tender-hearted little boy. I felt his shame from an early age. I could never be what he needed in a son, and his disdain for me was always apparent, just below the surface. Now let me insert right here that everyone's story is going to be different. I am not claiming that everyone who is gay or transgender had a horrible relationship with their parents. This is just my story. I am saying that my dynamic of femininity functioned like everyone's dynamic functions, to protect me somehow. Remember dunamis? This is where it comes into play. My shame, my particular feelings of being less than male, kept me from trying to live up to my father's masculinity and failing. One Christmas morning, when I was about 5, I got the painting set that I really wanted. Oh, I remember ripping into the packaging with great delight. When it was truly what I had hoped, I was elated. I ran over to where my mother was sitting and embraced her. With great excitement, I ran over to my father, who was sitting in his usual perch, the black leather recliner in the corner of the living room, a fishbowl glass filled with his morning beer at his side. As I went to throw my arms around him, he threw up his hand, motioning me to stop. I did, quick and confused. He then changed the position of his hand, expecting me to hold out mine as well. Men don't hug. Men shake hands, he exclaimed. I felt the hot red flash on the back of my neck immediately. Shame, that familiar feeling. Again, I wanted something I should not. I couldn't keep track anymore on what to want or how to please, but I knew I needed to be cautious around this man. Men were not safe. He was not safe. I figured being a girl was so much easier. More room to be free, less room to be caught. Shame, that frenetic energy that one has nothing to offer, kept me running. So sin energized my wounded heart to pursue idols. In fact, the idols I pursued were the contextualization of my woundedness. I looked to other boys as something I needed to be, as if I weren't truly one already. I didn't measure up, and to be like them turned into to be liked by them, as the exotic became the erotic. Idolatry is never satisfied and always demands more. Immorality is just its natural progression. At 14, I could hold it in no longer, so I told my drunken father I thought I was homosexual, although there was no doubt in my mind. I didn't have the words yet for being transgender, and my desires were all one big ball of chaos anyway. I knew I had made a mistake the minute he looked at me hearing those words. The same old familiar feeling of shame reddened my face. He proceeded to regale me with stories from his youth when in downtown Cleveland he would be propositioned by gay men. He would entice them into restrooms where he would beat them to a pulp and flush their heads down toilets. I can still hear the echoes of his laughter as he was so pleased with himself, trying to convince me that I wasn't like one of those queers. I quickly agreed so I could put an end to his storytelling. And a year later, I would be kicked out of that house. My story was all about regret. I saw no redemption. I did not see how God could use my shame nor my suffering, so I stuffed it down. So my story redeemed was nothing, which meant the relationship I was offering out of my story was nothing. I was blind to the gifts that come out of a redeemed story. I got nothing, so you get nothing. So no relationships. My dynamic then? Nothing. Story dead. Relationship dead. Dynamic dead. So I was as good as dead. Let's talk more about sex and gender here. Sex is what you are born with, what your gametes dictate. Your gametes are the cells that become either sperm or eggs. Sex is binary. This is simply biological. There's a strong movement to erase this scientific fact and ignore this reality. Sex is fluid is becoming a watch phrase. But sex is an objective attribute. Gender identity, on the other hand, seems trickier, as does gender expression. We are being instructed by some that sex, gender, and orientation are spectra. But gender, unlike what we are being told, is biological as well. The way one moves toward masculine or feminine is biological, while the expression of it may be environmentally enabled or socially constructed. The four most used terms of gender expression out of dozens of possibilities are non-binary, genderqueer, gender neutral, and gender fluid. There are two genders, and these constructs actually and ironically reinforce that. Gender expression, however, takes on an infinite number of manners and mannerisms. According to most recent studies, millennials are almost twice as likely to identify as LGBTQ as people in Generation X. However, they who are not part of the community probably don't know someone who identifies as gay or lesbian. 1 in 5 Gen Z adults, those who are 11 to 26, 1 in 5 identify as LGBTQ. And that number is only expected to go up, according to a recent Gallup poll. Those who consider themselves LGBTQ are identifying as something other than lesbian or gay. These terms reveal an ever-growing rainbow umbrella. According to a Harris poll conducted on behalf of GLAAD, 10% of millennials self-identified as transgender, agender, gender fluid, bigender, or genderqueer, compared with only 4% of Generation X, those born between 65 and 80, who said the same. The percentage of U.S. adults who identify as LGBTQ has doubled over the last decade, from 3.5% in 2012 to over 7% in 2021. Doubled. Gen Z adults, those born between 97 and 2012, who identify as LGBTQ, has increased from 10.5% to 20.8% in 2021. 57% of LGBTQ Americans identify as bisexual, the most common identification amongst adults surveyed. The number of traditionalists, baby boomers, and Generation X adults who identify as LGBTQ has remained the same. A lot of statistics, a lot of numbers. Basically, things are changing. By the way, if you want a copy of those statistics, just let me know. I have a copy. I can give those to you. That was a lot to put out there. Okay. The largest group of individuals affected is middle school girls who are becoming transgender in what's being called rapid onset gender dysphoria. It's at a frightening level with terrifying speed. It's a social contagion. For about 40% of these young women, more than half of their friend group had come out as transgender. More than 70 times the prevalence of transgender adults in the general population. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. If we consider that passage in the context of gender, where glory is what we are because of who we were designed to reflect, there is added gravitas. Our gender's purpose would have us all pointing back at our Creator. That's the point of Imago Dei, being God's image. But we've all fallen short by losing our perspective and purpose, and it is only the gospel that gives them back, freeing us to enter more fully into our humanity, our personhood, and our gender. In other words, to be more like Christ, to be conformed into His image. It is our gender that reveals something about God Himself, and we are whole and complete when tethered to that and reflect Him. A God-designed sense of being is our deepest need, because that's where we worship the most profoundly, which makes gender confusion our deepest issue, and sin, missing that mark, our deepest problem. We will deny, distort, and demand in the quest of being without God. We will attempt to fight God as being unfair and unjust. We will blur the boundaries between genders, even in the church, respectably, of course. God shuts up all under sin. The curse from sin guarantees that none of us will ever live up to our design without the rescue or deliverance that comes through Christ. SSA is but one way that broken sexuality expresses itself. It is one example, in fact, that Paul uses in Romans 1 to show how God reveals His wrath, giving people over to their immorality for exchanging the truth for the lie. The truth is how we are designed as a male and a female, as a couple, to reflect Trinitarian glory. 2 in 1 reflect the 3 in 1. Unity in diversity. The lie would be that 2 men or 2 women could accomplish that goal, or any other combination, I might add. 1 man and 1 woman is what God designed as natural. Add to that, and it's against nature, it's the sexual decline of exchanging the glory of God. He states that nature itself dictates the truth of this, exposing it as unnatural and shameful. The sin nature in which we are born and with which we are born comes through a prism of woundedness, coloring the sin, creating particular and unique trajectories of self-protective strategies, searching for peace and safety our way and in our timing. In other words, we will move into our worlds demanding comfort and control above all. Shame evades the gaze of the other, exclaiming, "Don't look at me." Shame knows that there is something inside deeply wrong, something that doesn't measure up. Shame energizes sinners to run, hide, and cover who they really are, who they were designed to be. SSA is geared up to protect the heart from further pain, which reinforces shame, creating a feedback loop. In the flesh, there is an attempt to relive rather than relieve that shame. It functions. Shame gives one the self-justified right to cop out, get back, and give in. As a therapist whose passion is helping those with sexual struggles, I'm honored to sit in that sacred space with hurting individuals who struggle with gender issues to expose and explore. I worked with a young man who, because of a terrible relationship between his parents, was forced to sleep in his mother's bed when he turned 12. His father had taken over the boy's room. This budding adolescent found an unconscious way to avoid sexual thoughts toward his barely clad mother by turning off his opposite sex desire. A young woman sexually abused by her uncle at a young age came to understand that men were not to be trusted, that women were safer for vulnerability, and in adolescence, her desires pointed her toward other girls. I counseled a man struggling with autogynephilia. His shame is reinforced as he fantasizes being made into a woman, punished for failing as a man. His heavy Catholic penance-laden upbringing dictated that he had to earn love from others, so with each failure he harmed himself, sometimes literally. Each case is individually unique, but the bent has similar conditions. Shame, function, and goal. I've got just a few more paragraphs. Can you hang on for just a few more paragraphs here? Okay. Shame, function, and goal. The shame of gender fallenness informs sexual brokenness like SSA in that insecurity of measuring up, the lack experienced in the sense of male or femaleness, permeates the direction of desire. Shame is established when one looks around and compares and feels lonely, lacking, or is explicitly told they don't measure up. And today there is an epidemic of gender dysphoria. Shame now has a convenient place to hang its hat. However one gets there, through destructive means like abuse, or more subtle means like peer pressure, social media, Hollywood, or culture in general, the enemy is out to steal, kill, and destroy the beauty and power of gender from under humanity. Shame tells us we have nothing to offer, so we will not offer what we are designed to give to the opposite sex in mirroring, magnifying, or mimicking the Lord. The purpose of gender difference is not procreation. It's not pleasure. It's proclamation of the Trinity, to point to Him. The mystery is that the core and corollary is Christ and the church. Shame thwarts that message. And sexual brokenness has a function. If I have nothing to offer as a male, I'm going to be filled with self-contempt. I'm going to move in ways that diminish my sexuality, and SSA is such a move. It functions to diminish the shame, deny relational longings, and demand control over my world. First, it diminishes shame. I'm relieved for a moment if I believe that I have nothing to offer as a male. I can quit trying. Peace. Now, it's peace that the world gives, but it's peace relief nonetheless. That's how self-contempt functions. It's the energy of hiding and covering up that which sin produces. Secondly, self-contempt functions by denying relational longings. I don't have to move toward the opposite sex in God-honoring ways if I'm not attracted to her or, worse, repulsed by her. That's functional. Shame provides a safety valve in that I'm free from having to move in frightening or risky relations. But safety is not what we are called to. Love is. Now, don't hear me saying that everyone who struggles with SSA needs to go out and get married. I'm not saying that. There are many God-glorifying men and women who are living in holy celibacy. But I am saying that it's not a given that there's no hope and that change is not possible. I am not a conversion therapist, not by a long shot. I just take God at His word and have received His grace. Thirdly, the control of self-contempt is idolatrous. The LGBT community demands that their orientation is the determiner of their direction in life. I would humbly disagree. I just don't see orientation as a biblical category. The locus of our contempt is the focus of our self-justification. In other words, where we locate our contempt, all I need out of life is blank, is where we focus our control. That becomes our idol. That becomes our God. When we believe that our SSA makes us a victim, then we put all our resources into resolving that issue. Or we attempt to fix it by either embracing it as an identity or we live in denial of it. Those are the two ditches I submit we need to avoid at all costs. I don't want to embrace a gay Christian identity, nor do I want to pretend it's not part of my story and a factor I have to consider in my sanctification. I experience same-sex attraction. I also experience all kinds of other temptations. This is just one of many. I don't want to be put into a box. Don't make me more or less a believer than any other lousy, rotten sinner saved by grace. Now, let's take a 10-minute break and come back for Gender and Sexuality Redeemed.